So last week we first talked about McLuhan's tetrad. Can somebody remind us what that box was that we looked at?
It had four things going on.
Yes. So it had four things going off it. A kind of a pragmatic approach to what any given piece of technology can do for us. And so you can think about any piece of technology through the prism of what does it retrieve for us? Is there something that's been lost? And so something like a radio brings back a lot of verbal communication. Is there something that it enhances for us? So the smartphone connects you with people that are really far away in a way that you used to maybe just catch up once a decade if you could fly or drive to them. Is there perhaps a way that it escalates to something you couldn't have anticipated? So smartphones paved the way for AI, and you wouldn't have been able to anticipate that, but if you think critically, maybe you could have seen the signs all along the way. So it was a way of critically asking, before I adopt a piece of technology, how can I think about its pros and its cons, the way it's going to enhance life, the way it's going to actually set back life in different ways? Well, now we're looking not so much at that really pragmatic, just what's the practical application of it way of doing it, but although this is still practical, we're looking at what the Bible has to say about how we evaluate the usefulness or detriments of any piece of technology. So we spent some time looking at some Bible verses from the Apostle Paul, where he outlines what we could call the school of virtue. And it has three things to learn. The right love of God, which he calls piety, the right love of neighbor, which he calls justice, and the right love of oneself, which you could call self-control. And we looked at passages in 1 Timothy and Titus, where Paul says those are basically the two contrasts of how you can live your life. You can live your life with those three virtues, or you could live a life that is kind of blasphemous. You're wearing the Lord's name in vain. You could live a life that mistreats other people instead of having justice for them. You could live a life of pride, which is kind of self-absorption and feeding yourself whatever you want, self-indulgence rather than self-control. And we put it together and said, in addition to that tetrad, those four boxes that you could think of technology through, you can also think of it through this pyramid, these different ways that we can ask ourselves, does a piece of technology build my self-control? Does a piece of technology enhance my ability to show justice to other people, to treat them well, or does it actually steer me in the opposite direction and make me a harsher person? And at the top of the pyramid, I couldn't decide. Does this go at the tip or the foundation? Either way, piety, the right love of God. Does a piece of technology allow us to be more pious, or does it actually prevent us or block us or demotivate us from loving God in a full way? So, as usual, the best way to get inside something like this is not just to talk about it, but to ask a question and think out loud together. Let's take social media and run it through this pyramid and ask, for each of these levels, what are some ways that it could make our self-control weaker, or what are some ways that we could exercise self-control to use social media well? So let's start at that first level, the bottom one, talking about self-control, or the right love of oneself. What are some ways, you can start with either the positive or the negative, let's think out loud together, ways that social media could either damage your self-control, or ways that you could practice self-control in order to use social media well.
Well, the algorithm on social media.
Yeah.
That you hold in, you can lose a lot. You look at one little thing that's 70.
Yeah.
100 more.
It just snowballs. Yeah.
And then you kind of pull it into it. You just
Yeah, so the algorithm works kind of like a fish hook. It gets you and it traps you. But instead of, it's not just hooking you like a hook catches a fish. It hooks your desires. And so you kind of feel trapped by your own will, actually. Like, I just can't get out of it, right? Yeah. What's another feature of the algorithm, though? It doesn't just trap you and then show you more of the same. What does it do? It escalates, it intensifies, right? So if you get hooked on a light form of some conspiracy theory, say that birds aren't real. That's a real one on the internet, by the way. Birds aren't real, they're drones. The government controls them. If you get hooked on something like that, well, a year later, you're not going to be seeing TikTok reels on birds anymore. You're going to be in something a lot darker and deeper, right? It escalates. And that's how we talked a couple weeks ago about how addiction never stays with the same amount. Lynn could tell us all about this. It gets more and more. You need more in order to meet the craving, right? So yeah, the algorithm with a capital A. We could talk about him or it a lot. Yeah. What else comes to mind?
Well, all the things that people put out there supposedly about themselves are curated kind of life that then people compare themselves to. And hard to love yourself when your life's so ordinary. Those other lives are so phenomenal.
Yeah, oh, that's a really good one. The comparison trap with other people, especially when you think of self-control, the way Paul defines it as the right love of yourself. The way that I heard Scott Swain unpack this idea is that loving yourself appropriately, self-control, is neither prideful, where you're wanting or aspiring to something higher than your own station in life, right? Don't daydream about being greater than you are. But it's also not dragging you down. It's not making you feel worse about yourself than you should. You're made in the image of God. It's that nice middle ground. And when you're in the comparison trap, it can make you daydream all day about what you wish you could be. The perfect parent, the one who has the right house, all this stuff. It can also make you feel really bad about yourself. And that's another way of losing self-control. Yeah. What else?
Bullying?
What was that?
Bullying?
Oh, bullying. So, like, unpack that more.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of bullying on social media, and you can, if you watch this and you're being bullied, you can never love yourself.
Yeah, so if you're receiving the bullying, it can change your self-perception and demote you to a lower station than you should have. And even if it's not directed just at you as an individual, the internet is a groupthink place, right? And if you associate with some camp, say the conservatives or the liberals or certain subcultures you're a part of, and that's getting attacked, well, that feels like it's coming towards you, doesn't it? That's why it's a social media. So even if it can be indirect and still do that.
It's, I'm sure it's not, but it's just so good for cowards who, instead of coming and dealing with the person themselves, they just kind of gather soldiers online by saying negative things, and they feel really powerful.
Yeah.
Parent groups.
Parent groups, yeah, parent groups. It gives people the chance to acquire a following and rally the mobs, and mob mentality, definitely a loss of self-control. That happens a lot not in the good theology world where people are actually thinking about God and all things in relation to God, but you get into you give social media to people, they're going to use religion to rally troops for horrible causes, right? So you see that all the time in religious ways, and that's typically what makes the news. Yeah. What about some positive ways? How does living a self-controlled life actually let us use social media with some restraints? Is there a way to combat the things that we've been talking about?
Knowledge. I mean, it gives us insight and knowledge, and therefore I can respond accordingly. Does that make sense? You know, if there's something going out there, and I get information on it, it gives me insight. I don't have to participate.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. Having a grasp of what's going on, so that you need to have an intellectual awareness of what's going on the internet to have self-control. That's good. What other ways can we exercise the virtue of self-control in order not to be mastered by social media?
Set restrictions on ourselves.
Okay.
It has to be intentional.
Yeah. Yeah.
Intentionally say, I'm gonna participate so long, but then turn it off.
Yeah. Have any of you tried using apps that set time limits on different apps?
It's for your kids.
That's for your kids. Yeah. Yeah, it is, right?
They have the self-control, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is, I just I'm reading a book by Claire Morrill. It just came out. I think it's called the Tech Exit. It's a guide for parents to help their kids break addictions to technology. And she begins the book with an avalanche of data that the parental controls make 0% difference in the addiction. We'll get into that. So at least with children, it's not working. But what are ways as adults that beyond simply setting a time limit on our phone or laptop, whatever, that self-control can be something we're intentional about, to use Lynn's word?
Well, you're involved in a conversation or something online and you sense it's becoming contentious.
Mm-hmm.
You know, having the strength of character to decide, I'm going to walk away from this.
Yeah,
This is no longer good.
yeah, definitely.
And it has to come from within, right? That you can have all the external gadgets you want, but if you don't want to get off of the thing,
Yeah.
you're not going to get off of it.
Yes,
You know.
that's right. You can always get around the obstacles that are in the way of what you want. Yeah, absolutely. So it has to come from the heart. There has to be some kind of inner drive, right? And for us, we have a resource for that, which is the pursuit of holiness and believing that there's a better life for us than being consumed by the things that we're consuming.
It's difficult, because usually for most addictions, you have to hit rock bottom before you really, most people don't just change just because they want to.
Yeah, yeah.
You have to hit rock bottom, so sure, it's just like any other addiction.
Yeah, hitting rock bottom helps a fair number of people at least see the problem. Yeah. Or believing other stories. I think that, like, for me, self-control, I'm more motivated when I take other people's stories of their their issues with social media seriously. Because I could say, well, I would never fall into that trap. And that can prevent me from falling into rock bottom if I just listen to other people and their experiences and how their lives have been altered in some negative ways by it, and not think, oh, that would never happen to me. So.
It can even be minor though, like, oh, I'm gonna be doing this instead when I should be like doing work around the house or whatever. It's like you end up just all day.
So you just got to
reading or what.
Absolutely, you just got to a key there. Whenever you're gonna stop doing something, you have to replace it with something else, right? And so self-control is not just saying, this is what I shouldn't be doing. It's a recommitment to responsibility. Actually, it's a word we don't like a whole lot, but washing dishes, that's a responsibility, right? Paying attention to children's responsibility, and committing ourselves to those is self-control. Yeah.
For me, it also reconfirms that something that we control is our self-image, and that it should come from the fact that we are all sinners, that God loves us unconditionally and forgives us. Otherwise, we could take our identity in career success, the car we drive, the social media responses, replies we get, a whole host of things. I don't know how the world does it without, because that's a slippery slope that you fall into, slips into self-comparison and just saps all joy out of life.
Yeah.
But I think in order to live a joyful life, there needs some self-control on what we take identity in. And social media and the temptation of it, I think, is another way to kind of remind us to rein back on that. That's not who we are. That's not what gives us worth. Our identity is on God, is in Christ.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. Social media is so entangled with identity creation and remembering what you are. Yeah, that's great. Let's move on to the second tier here. There we go. Justice, right love of neighbor. We've been talking about self-control. What about the way that we interact with others? How can social media maybe distort, worsen the way that we interact with others? And what are some commitments on the positive side we can make in order to love others well through our use of it? You mentioned bullying being the receiver of it. You can also give it. Yeah.
Well, it can create animosity for whatever subject it happens to be at the time, or just generalized. It doesn't have to be a direct person.
Yeah.
It's general group of people,
Yeah.
by reading or
Absolutely.
certain things.
I was thinking it separates us externally from our neighbor, like from a justice standpoint. So if we're consuming media about whatever topic, and we say, oh, well, this is justice, it's actually external, it's not personalized. Versus like if we're in our community, in our neighborhood, talking to our actual neighbors, we're actually experiencing an opportunity for real justice. So like my neighbor next door who needs their grass cut versus me seeing, liking videos of people getting their grass cut.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, that's right. That reminds me of, I think I said this in church recently, the C.S. Lewis quote from Screw Tape Letters, where the older demon says to the younger demon, one great tactic is to take a person's love and channel it to the people really far away on the other side of the world, but channel their hate to the people right next to them. And yeah, social media can distort can flip those in a harmful way.
And is there, it could also be, a certain, platform of social media can be very biased. And that's all you're hearing, you're not hearing the whole picture.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're being formed to be a biased person, which probably distorts your view of other people that are just being distorted by different biases in a different direction. Yeah. Something that comes to mind for me is the way that on social media, it's probably different from platform to platform, but kind of combining the self-control and justice boxes, you can see some controversy that's bubbling that you've never even heard about and isn't important at all, and feel really invested in it and start to actually dislike people who disagree with you about this thing you just heard of that doesn't actually matter. So let me give an example of just how trivial this is. Some person, I don't even listen to this musician at all, Sabrina Carpenter. Yesterday, I released a new album cover, and it's in the picture on the album cover, she's doing, it's a kind of an obscene photo on it, right? And I just don't care. It makes no difference in my life, and yet the internet is ablaze with it, and people are so mad at each other for supporting this picture or saying that's inappropriate, it shouldn't be on an album cover, and you start to feel really invested and dislike people over it, and it's like, wow, this just distorts priority completely. It's amazing how quickly it can happen.
And interpretations.
Yeah, Yeah. So now, any others on that second box? I mean, there are endless things to mention.
Just divisiveness for all kinds of reasons. Just polarizes.
Yeah.
Like what you said, strengthens feelings about things that separate us instead of uniting us.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, just think of the word neighbor there, and just seeing some of the things that come up on the Ring doorbell. Weird. Not only about the pets that have escaped and stuff, but you know, people question, well, what's going on in the neighborhood? And so these are people kind of close by, and so it feels a little
Yeah.
nuts.
Yeah.
You can see things on the other side of the world, like an elephant's walking through their yard.
Yeah.
You know, so there's good and bad, right?
Yeah.
Something interesting what goes on in.
Or like
that you never see.
yeah, there's a house in California, Northern California, that routinely has bears using their jacuzzi, and ring cameras catching it all the time. It's amazing, right? It's like, I wouldn't kick those bears out. I'd love it. Yeah. So the divisiveness of it, for sure. Getting back to that. Yeah.
So those are the ones on the ones.
Yeah. Doug, commenting on the divisiveness, to take a really important one, where I think you're totally right. Take political polarization. If you're on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or Truth Social, and all you see are complaints about the other side that give like these 2 or 3 reasons. This is why people voted for Trump, or this is why people voted for Kamala Harris. It starts to trick you into thinking those are the only possible reasons that someone might have. And so either you're like a raging communist or you're like close to being a Nazi. And those are kind of the options. When really there are all kinds of complicated reasons that have to do with people's stories, the ways people have been affected when they were kids, the ways that maybe they have friends that will be impacted by this or that policy, all kinds of reasons that would be actually pretty understandable why they would vote for someone you didn't. But it has a way of making us forget about those. It erases them, right? And so I think one way to be careful on social media, not necessarily to just get off of it, I think that would be helpful for a lot of people, but if we're going to stay on it, to remind ourselves very frequently that that's a trap we're going to fall into, and recommit our love to other people. Use the golden rule to love your neighbor as yourself as a standard by which you operate online. Having some just principles to go back to, I think, can protect us from that. Piety of, right love of God. This, I think, is actually the trickiest one to say, because there's a temptation in Christian circles to say, well, the only right way to use social media then, since we've named all these problems, is to post Bible verses and like retweet Christian think pieces and things. Like the content itself it has to be Christian all the time, or else you're using it poorly. So like kind of an analogy for that, I grew up in an age where, maybe this is still continuing with Christian teenagers, I don't know. But when I grew up, it was only Christian music is acceptable, and secular music is always evil no matter what. And so as long as you get the Christian content in there, well, then the music is good. And we can fall into the same thing where like, as long as what I'm posting on social media is Christianese, then it's going to be okay, and everything else is kind of wrong. I don't think that's the right way to view piety. I think that there's actually something good about appreciating good things on the internet that aren't Christian, and having a bit more gray view of that. What do you guys think about that? How can you honor God through your use of social media?
People post charitable organizations, things like that, and the things they're doing to help others.
Yeah,
See that a lot as well.
it's true.
So you always hear good stories too,
Yeah.
how people have helped others and encouragement and things like
By that rationale, a toaster would be evil.
What was that?
By that rationale, a toaster would be evil.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to, everything doesn't have to be about God. It can
Yeah.
reflect on His creation. It can improve life. It doesn't,
Mm-hmm.
valid reasons for things isn't necessarily all everything biblical.
Yeah. And God can give people really great gifts in music or art or whatever that actually do reflect His glory, even if the words themselves are not about Him or even honoring to Him.
There's a
and-
line across though if it goes blasphemous or lies or deceitful, then
Yes.
it
Yes.
can,
Exactly. And so, I'll put these up here. George sent me a helpful email using the word structure and direction to get at this. George, I can give a shot at summarizing this, but you're here. Maybe I'd like to hear you do it.
I won't go into the background of where that came from, but it came out of, in general, the Reformed Kuyperian tradition in the Netherlands, which fostered a lot of people thinking about this sort of thing. But what it means is this: as Reformed believers, we particularly love the idea that God is sovereign over all things, and that nothing happens that surprises Him or is outside of His realm. And in that sense, He also built a world for us at creation in which we find ourselves living within what we call the structure. I call it the structure of God's creation. It could be as simple as the law of gravity, as complex as right relationships between husband and wife and children. We sense that there are things God has sort of hardwired into creation, and even unbelievers have a hard time pushing against that. Bad government is still government. Hurting marriage is still a marriage. And that structure. The direction is when our wicked hearts in sin want to push against that and try to pervert or twist or distort what God has made good. And so I find that helpful because the arts are perhaps the easiest examples to use. You were mentioning that already, but I can think of numerous songs or movies which are musically or cinematically extremely well done, beautiful cinematography or powerful music, and yet the intent behind it is to say, I am king, or I am Lord of the universe, or I can do whatever I want. And there's where the direction, the heart is moving away from God, and so in doing so, almost everything we touch in that sense can or does become twisted, perverted. One more thought I always love, I'm a big fan of C.S. Lewis, and I'm trying to remember, I can't remember if it's in Screwtape Letters or one of his, the sci-fi trilogy, but he describes Satan as one who is bent. And I always like that because it doesn't mean he's not a creature of God. It means he's a creature of God that's been bent in the wrong way.
Yeah, that's helpful. So let me give a practical example that attaches it to social media. You were talking about kind of spreading. Social media is a place where you can spread ideas, right? You can share podcasts, you can share articles you read online, things like that. Well, let's say that there are two different podcasters who each record a podcast about gay marriage. One of them is a Christian, one is not. The Christian one makes a really, really kind of harsh defense of traditional marriage that kind of hurls ad hominems and names at gay people, but all the content is true as far as the biblical content goes. That would be an example of something having, if I'm understanding the categories right, that's something that has the right direction because it's saying what's true, but it has a bad structure, right? It's not crafted in a way that honors God. Well, let's say the non-Christian records the podcast that is saying gay marriage is good. In fact, we should be expanding it to all kinds of marriages. But he does so in a way that's actually very charitable, that seeks to understand his opponent's arguments and articulate them fairly. There's no name calling. It's really seeking good faith in a conversation. Well, that has really good structure, but bad direction. And I think what I see with Christians a lot is that when, say, a controversy about gay marriage arises and people feel like they have to share something, they're probably going to share or sometimes they're going to share the really harsh podcast that has all kinds of name calling and stuff, because they think, well, it's only the content that matters and the Christian content is good. Whereas someone else could see it as it's actually glorifying to God to treat people we disagree with well and model good disagreements in a virtuous way, even if the content is wrong. And I think as one way to honor God with our use of social media is to strike that balance well and kind of open our imaginations to go beyond just anything that's vaguely Christian is good to share online. Sometimes it can actually be detrimental to God's name if it uses really harsh means. I talk about this because I see it on Twitter constantly. There's a desire to kind of own the libs, right? You own the libs by being really harsh toward them. Well, no, it has to have good structure as well. Is that making sense?
Yeah, it
Okay.
makes sense. However,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we always have to be politically right in the media and in society as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, Christians seem, I don't know, there seems to be more disregard to Christians' communication about biblical truths
Mm.
because it's offensive. You know, what you say is offensive to me.
Mhm.
I don't, agree with that. I guess,
Yeah.
where's the line politically right and yet truth?
Yeah. You mean like politically correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think what we should be striving for, there's a difference between what we can take in and what we put out there ourselves. As Christians, we should be seeking to put out what is true at all times. James Wood, theologian, calls this being a reality respecter. I think that's such a great line. We have to be reality respecters. We believe that God defines truth and we are always going to be true to it. And we should do so with Christian posture. We should do so in a way that reflects the character of Christ and not think that getting the truth across is an opportunity to vilify, or sometimes vilify, like showing someone's wrong, that's fine. But to tear somebody down with name calling or harshness or things like that. So I think we strike the balance by doing it that way. And I think it is good for Christians to opt out of sharing content online that comes from Christians that are verbally abusive people, which happen, like Christians just do that a lot because in order to be right, we think we have to be harsh to do it. I think this is a small group of people, but they're a vocal minority on Twitter.com. So does that jive or?
I was wondering, isn't that sort of why we're told to speak the truth in love?
Yeah.
You've got truth, but if you can't say it in love, shut up.
Yeah. And learn to say it in truth in love so that you can say it. Because we don't want to be silent about things either. But you have to learn. Yeah.
One thought that occurred to me listening to Lynn's question is perhaps we should not, if possible, bow to political correctness just to win the audience. But on the other hand, sometimes if someone expresses offense, the best thing you can do is express love back to them. As opposed to saying, well, if you can do it, I'll do it right back to you double.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the best answer, but that thought occurred to me.
That's a great answer. Because what we're getting at here is that I don't think we can just make a list of bullet points of here's exactly how you do well on social media. It requires a lot of careful reflection and wisdom and taking stock of your own heart, taking stock of how your words are going to impact people before you type them out and send them. People used to write letters to each other and then stick the letter in a drawer and wait a few days before you actually put it in the mail. Go back and reread it, because you might regret some things that you wrote. You can't really put a comment in the drawer, right? You just type it and press send. And thinking those things through in advance, it takes wisdom, and that's why we're talking about virtue formation so much in this. We want to be practical, but there are steps to get there that are kind of painfully slow to think these things through.
Is there any point of ever posting anything to try and change someone's mind?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Is there, because has anybody ever changed their mind based on a post on social media?
Part of the, on Facebook, I would say no. Among select friends on Twitter, yes. But that has to do, again, with a layer of wisdom of who am I talking to? Will they receive this the right way? With the caveat that it's always public. And when you're public, you're performing. Anytime a camera's on, you're performing. Right now, I'm performing because my voice is being captured on this, right? And so I would prefer to call somebody if I want to have a conversation about what they've posted online. Because it's going to be more authentic that way. But
I just don't know if anybody, I don't think anybody changes their mind.
I think that's probably truer than I realize, yeah.
I think you have to have a personal connection with somebody over a long term to be able to, it's a long-term commitment to get to somebody to change.
Yeah.
Change their mind about something. It's not about, ever going to be about us.
Yeah. Maybe an application for us on that is to become the kinds of people whose minds can be changed by true arguments. There's no incentive to change your mind when it's about winning. But if we are going to be reality respecters, we're pursuers of truth, we're open to having our minds changed even if others aren't. And it's kind of humility it takes online. All right, it's 10:27. We'll get back to this next week. And let me pray as we wrap up. Heavenly Father, we're grateful again for the time you give us, and we pray for our worship this morning to be honoring to you. We are excited to gather with a great room of believers to sing your praises, to hear your word, to partake of communion with your Son. And so we commit this time to you. In Christ's name, amen.